The first step in constructing your tote is to take it and put it right sides together so that you're lining up these outside edges, the top and the corners. We're going to start first by taking these two long edges, making sure that they're perfectly lined up. I'm going to pin them to hold them in place, and we're going to sew down both sides using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We've stitched our two long sides together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and now we're going to create our gusset. Now to do this, you're going to take the corners and you're going to fold them like this. And then we're going to pin them so that we can sew again using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we're going to take this and pin these down so you can see how that works. And then we'll sew across, and this creates the bottom gusset for our tote bag. We've completed sewing the gusset for our tote, so we're going to turn it right side out. And you can pop those corners of your gusset out and see how nice that finishes up. Into the two sides, like that, and gives your tote great dimension. The last thing we're going to do to finish the base of our tote is to add the binding around the top. We'll create our binding using the 46 inches of 2.5 inch strips that we've starched and cut. You can join your binding strips a couple of different ways. I like to do it at an angle because this will reduce the bulk. So you want to take your two pieces and place them perpendicular to each other, and you're going to be sewing at a 45-degree angle this way. So when you open it up, it'll be like that, nice and straight. So we'll start by pinning the corner, and then I'm going to mark my line from corner to corner. So we have this nice and flat here, and I like to mark it rather than doing it freehand. So I've got this corner at the top, and you want to meet it up to the corner on the back, like that. And I'm going to mark this line, and then I can sew right on that line. We have our line stitched now. You take these pins out, and I'll flip this over and show you how nice and neat that joins our binding together. So we can take a scissors, and we're going to trim that seam down to about 1/4 inch. And then press that open. Next, we're going to take our binding and we're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together. Because I want the beginning of my binding and the end to be nice and flat as well, I'm going to start by taking my starting edge and I'm going to fold that at a 45-degree angle and press. This way, when we nest the opposite end of our binding, we have a nice flat section of binding. So we'll start by folding that in half, or folding that rather at a 45-degree angle. Then we'll turn the binding wrong sides together and press the entire length of our binding. The binding is now completely pressed, wrong sides together. And because we use starch when we first cut the fabrics, you can see I have a really nice crisp folded edge. So we're going to take our tote and pin our binding with the raw edges on the raw edges of our tote bag. Now, we want to keep a tail because we're going to have to nest the binding as it comes back around to the beginning. So you want to leave a good 6-8 inches from where you start sewing. So we're going to start sewing right about there, and we're going to continue and pin our binding with the raw edge of the binding to the raw edge of the tote bag. Once we've completely pinned this in place, we're going to sew the binding using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, as I come around back to the beginning where my beginning tail is, you want to make sure and stop stitching well in advance of the end of your tail. So that comes right about there, and I want to stop stitching and so we can join the two ends of our binding. Our binding is sewn on with the two tails left open because this is where we're going to nest the end of the binding into the beginning that has the nice pressed seam. So you're going to take that and tuck that inside. If you have extra, you can trim away any extra so that it's not going all the way back here. And you're going to place that in there, lay that flat, and we'll pin it in place and complete sewing the binding to the top of our tote. Now that we've finished stitching our binding to the top outside edge of our tote, we're going to take our tote and turn it inside out rather, so that we can turn the binding around to the back side. So I'm going to take this and take my binding and wrap it around to the back side and pin this in place. We're going to go around the entire top of the tote. Then once we have this all pinned in place, we'll take it to the machine and we can top stitch right through the layers, securing our binding to the top edge of the tote. Our binding is now secured front and back to our tote bag. The entire base of the bag is done. Now all we have left to make is the straps. Next, we're going to create the straps for our tote. The straps consist of batting covered with the 2.5 by 33 inch strips and the webbing that was included in your package that will be covered with the 2 inch by 33 inch strips. The first step is to take the batting and cut the straps out directly on the blue lines. I've done that right here. So we have our 2 pieces of batting, which adds some cushion to our straps. You're going to start your straps by covering the batting with the 2.5 by 33 inch strips, my apologies. And you're going to start by taking the 2 short ends and folding those and pressing them 1/2 inch wrong sides together, so that when you sew the straps onto your tote, you'll have a nice clean edge. So we'll press those under 1/2 inch. Then we're going to take our strip of batting and we're going to center it on the strip of fabric and turn the fabric wrong sides onto the batting. And you're going to fold one side the length on top of the batting and then fold the other side over the length of batting and press. If you'd like, you could use quilt basting spray to adhere the batting to the strip of fabric. That's an option if you like, and then press down the entire length of the strip. I now have my 2 batting straps encased in fabric, so we're going to set those aside. And then I want to take my webbing that was in the package, and the first thing I want to do is measure it to make sure that it measures 30 inches in length. If it's a little bit long, trim it to 30 inches. Then I'm going to take my 2 inch by 33 inch strips of fabric And similar to the way I covered the batting, I'm going to do the same thing with the webbing. So I'm going to fold this over 1/2 inch, wrong sides together at each of the short ends. Then I'm going to take the webbing and place it on the wrong side of the strap fabric. And I'm going to fold over the edges, and I'm going to press that fabric to encase the webbing. One thing I want to point out when you are covering the webbing, you want to center this not just from side to side, also down the length, because what will happen is you'll find that the fabric is about 1 inch longer than the webbing itself. This will make for a thinner area that'll be easier to sew through when you attach the straps to your bag. So be aware that the ends will be centered as well as side to side. So now we have our 2 batting straps encased in fabric and our 2 webbing straps encased in fabric. Now you're going to take the straps and with the wrong sides together, which is the folded edges, you've got the folded edge over the batting here, the folded edge over the webbing, you're going to place those sides together. And you want to line up the ends and then pin these to hold them in place. And what you're going to do once we have these pinned together is we are going to stitch through both straps just to the inside of the narrower one. The batting gives you a nice cushion for when you carry things, and the webbing gives strength and durability. We now have our 2 straps constructed. They're top stitched to hold all the layers in place. And you'll feel when you work with them that because our webbing started up higher, it's relatively thin, which means when we attach them to our tote bag, it'll be very easy to sew through the layers. So we want to attach those by taking a ruler, and you want to lay your tote bag nice and flat. And we'll take a ruler, and we want to measure 5 inches from that outside seam. So we'll take a marking pen and our ruler, and you want to mark 5 inches from that edge and 5 inches from that edge. So there's our markings, and then we want to take our strap and we're going to place it face down, align the edge of the strap with the edge of the binding and the other edge with the 5-inch marking that you had just made. And then we're going to pin our strap right here. And then we're going to do that over to the other side. We're going to place our strap so that it's flush with the binding and the marking that we had placed on here at 5 inches. And we're going to pin that in place. And then we'll flip over our tote and we'll do it for the other side. Now that we've sewn our straps down, upside down, we're going to flip them over so that they're right sides up and pin them down. And then we're going to top stitch them into place. And we'll do that on both sides of the tote. The handles are now top stitched and our June Tailor sew by number tote is complete.